we're reborrowing all the principal and all the interest that we're paying on it, because the banks can't possibly consume so much production from us. And we're reborrowing that then to maintain a vital circulation so we can go on, continue to service the initial debts while we're amassing all this further debt on us, which is inevitably terminal and eventually causes us to appear in court to defend ourselves for a foreclosure on our mortgage. So what is our defense? Is it the obfuscation of the currency is unjust, we've never given our assent to it, or is it the fact that the banks can't produce the contract? This is the thing that we have to understand. If the people are going to prevail over the banks in an actual solution. So I spoke about mathematically perfected economy basically since I was, 16 years old. What does this entail? What really is mathematically perfected economy? If we back up to this one day in a high school economics classroom, we can deduce mathematically perfected economy from my question and the only rhetorical answer. And that is, first of all, that our first issues are inflation and deflation, even if they can't occur ostensibly, because what do you have under this obfuscation of the currency? You have a perpetual multiplication of artificial indebtedness, which, in fact, in the end of the system, requires you to increase the circulation, so there is some free circulation which is available to continue servicing this ever-escalated sum of artificial indebtedness. Now, how is that done? But by breaking the rules of the system. And so that's why you have all these other things going on that are beyond you. How could we allow these people to, create this scheme we call derivatives, artificial ownership of wealth, as if it is properly tallied in assets which are not even held by us, but allow us to borrow more money into circulation. All of the things that ensue actually follow on the heels of this obfuscation of the currency. So only if we understand this fact that the natural life cycle of a promissory obligation is just this. My neighbor is paid in full from the very beginning because he has a promissory note which, so long as it is enforceable, and it can only be enforceable under mathematically perfected economy, so long as it is enforceable, he's paid. Does he ask for interest? None of us do. But we all say if we have to get our money from the banks, that we have to borrow it subject to interest, even though all the banks are actually doing is not lending us money. All this money didn't always exist. They created it, and they created it only when we accepted a promissory obligation, the very contract which allows us to take on a mortgage for our houses, etc., etc. Okay? So now, what is happening is the real creditor is the person who provides the house in return for the promissory obligation. And the very central banking system itself denies the real creditor, and who is the only creditor. It denies the real creditor interest. So what's the justification of this argument? None. There is none. And this is why you only have people in Ron Paul forums who continue to go on trying somehow to justify interest, saying it's necessary, that it's a signal to commodities traders of when to sell, when to release our production that they only own to take unjustifiable profit from us to the greatest degree of exploitation possible. They're saying interest has to be this signal. You see, well, you and I who produce things aren't going to argue for that, not in our right minds at least. And if we are such unwitting subjects of this entire system of exploitation that we believe wrongly that this signal of interest, this lie of a signal of interest is actually indispensable to us or it serves us somehow, how? And if we don't know how, then we are believing this not only wrongly, but to our own inevitable destruction, because this system can only precipitate in our complete destruction. Everyone, you're going to lose all your jobs. Everything is going to eventually fall to this terminal failure, because no one can circulate any money at all. But money is real, and there is a right thing for money to be, and there is a wrong thing for money to be. And unless we understand this obfuscation of the currency, then we cannot possibly understand what is a solution. So, if we go back here, we have our possible problems of inflation and deflation. Another problem is this inherent, irreversible multiplication of artificial indebtedness into an inevitably terminal failure. Okay? So both these issues that were raised in my initial questions to my high school teacher are two of the what I call categoric faults of pretended economy. These things, inflation and deflation, are things that we inevitably suffer. How do we suffer deflation? Well, we suffer deflation, and the eventual failure is a manifestation of this cause of deflation. We suffer deflation because the currency, which is just the principal that's introduced to circulation, is an obligation to pay not only the principal out of circulation, but all the interest on it. So there's a perpetual deflationary aspect of this obfuscation of the currency. What is inflation? Inflation is really it's actually been given to you as a long-term lie. Beginning with the Reagan administration, this is when, in the course of all these things, I noticed it becoming a prolific misunderstanding. In the beginning of the Reagan administration, actually during his campaign for president, Reagan started misusing the word inflation rather often. And that is that he was asserting that circulatory inflation is equivalent to price inflation, as my teacher had, that price inflation is a consequence of inflation. And I was saying to my teacher at the time, no, not even possible. Excuse me. Ever more of every unit of the circulation is inherently dedicated, ever more so, to servicing this artificial, ever-escalating sum of debt. Leaving ever less to sustain the industry, which is forced, nonetheless, to increase its prices to maintain margins of solubility. Why is it forced to do so? Because inevitably, its workers, or its other markets, or itself assume this debt, which just is necessary to maintain a vital circulation. So this drives up its prices, because ever more so, industry, and even at an ever-escalating rate, industry is obligated to sustain itself against these ever-increasing costs of an ever-increasing sum of artificial indebtedness. Now, so this was very inaccurate, obviously, for Reagan to be doing this, and in truth, if you had what we might call a rudimentary education, which is indoctrination into this dogma of the lie of economy, which can only impose ever greater costs upon us. It's not economy at all. It's actually a way of multiplying our obligation to pay more and more and more at an ever-escalating rate to a banking system, a purported banking system, which is actually only the publisher of our promissory obligations to each other. So, no. increases in circulation don't cause price inflation. They allow us for a while until the debt is multiplied in the next step further to afford that much more of the increasing prices that industry is forced to charge us, not because of the increasing circulation, but because of the ever escalating increase in indebtedness, which of course is terminal. As soon as you can't afford to service your debt, you find out when the man in the pinstripe suit visits your front door and tells you you're going into foreclosure. So our problems are inflation and deflation. The third category fault I usually give is this inherent irreversible multiplication of artificial indebtedness by interest. In other words, this process is terminal, and it precipitates an ever greater injustice as it multiplies this indebtedness. In other words, suppose that wasn't even terminal. Suppose it didn't result in universal bankruptcy across the system and defeasance. Even if you don't owe any money, you are nonetheless going to be rendered insoluble in the end because your markets can't afford to do anything. They're bankrupt. Your suppliers went bankrupt. You can't get any supplies, etc. There's no insulating ourselves from this because we are such an interdependent world community now. And many of my plagiarists have long proposed that there was one way or another way that you could insulate yourself from this, and so they would steal my parable of perfect economy to prove that you could buy this software from them and trade your work, and and they claim that these systems work, but they're not working. Yes, we might trade a little bit of work here and there, but the truth of the matter is you go onto their software, their forums, and you find that very few people are doing this because you just don't find the person that wants to take what carrots you're growing in your yard for software to run their website or whatever. It's preposterous to think that we can insulate ourselves from this somehow effectively. To a small degree we might do that, but not to our protection, and even still only to the least protection, if any at all. The truth of the matter is you're suffering the cost of everything around you escalating because of an artificial multiplication of an artificial debt to a mere publisher of our promissory obligations to each other who isn't even really owed the principal even, much less all the interest on it. What is their crime against us? The crime is, first, that they're laundering the principal into their own possession, and secondly, that they're charging interest for this. And how does this work out? When they issue $100,000 into circulation for your $100,000 house, the guy who builds the house is paid the $100,000. He's completely satisfied so long as that money has integrity. But it can't have integrity under every central banking system of the world because ever more of every unit of that circulation is going to be dedicated to servicing an ever-escalating sum of artificial indebtedness. We know from that alone that we can't maintain the integrity of the circulation. So the second crime against us is that they charge interest. So all in all, if we can get our brains around this whole scheme just for one house, one $100,000 house, which of course exemplifies everything else. 10 cents issued $100,000 into circulation, artificially and unjustifiably enriched a mere publisher of our promissory obligations to each other to the tune of $100,000 for 10 cents. Then we paid another $400,000 out of circulation on a long-term debt, forcing ourselves to borrow that all back into circulation as a new debt, thus assuming a $500,000 debt at the closure of paying off this original lie of a $100,000 debt to a bank, which merely published the evidence of our promissory obligations to each other, while the real creditor was paid in full and was denied interest by the banking system. How preposterous is all this?